Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Yeah, we are we're stuck in the motorhome. Power is out in my neighborhood, so we have to do the show in the van. Clever. And I had to turn on the Starlink, and dude, literally, it was like right at the nick of time. Unbelievable. Yeah. So tonight, guys, we're going to be talking about Esther, part 15 of the examination of Esther, Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox and King James version. So Esther is examined tonight as a preservation narrative rather than a restorative narrative, unlike Ezra and Nehemiah in the past. It contains no temple, no prophet, no miracle, no public repentance, and no explicit naming of God. Now, the book unfolds entirely within exile, under foreign authority among a people who have survived but are largely assimilated, right? So its theology is carried not through speech or law, but through restraint, timing, and even reversal. Now, God's presence is inferred through outcome rather than declared through intervention. And because the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox text and the King James Bible remain closely aligned in events, this examination does not just rely on frequent verse-by-verse comparison, as Scripture is read aloud only where framing or cadence meaningfully alters how agency, providence, violence, or even moral weight is perceived here. Yeah, this is a trip. Now, the silence of the text is treated as intentional rather than deficient, and no attempt is made to supply theological commentary where the narrative withholds it. Now, Esther reveals covenant survival without covenant practice. Deliverance occurs without revival, and memory is preserved without restoration. Now, the book records restraint rather than triumph, and survival rather than righteousness. So, read after Ezra and Nehemiah, Esther actually completes the post-exilic sequence by showing what God permits when alignment has eroded, but covenant memory still remains. So it does not justify exile politics or sanctify violence, however, but it exposes the cost of survival without obedience and preserves life so that return remains possible. So that's what we're talking about tonight. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number one warrior is Scorpion saying, welcome back, friend. I missed you. Well, I missed you guys too. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys hanging in there with Urban the legend, Urban and his show Odyssey. Urban filled in for me for the past 10 days. I have been gone. I was in Turks and Caicos Islands, which is a Caribbean island about north of Haiti. And I got a chance to take 10 days off and just do nothing, although I honestly did more than just nothing. I took my pastor friend, Eddie, who's my mentor, and he went with me, and we did everything, man. We did a boat that had, it's called like a semi-submarine. So underneath the boat is another boat that has all these windows, so you're just going through. So this took us through all the coral, and we saw a bunch of turtles and crazy fish. It was beautiful. It was fun. And then the following day, we rented a boat, and well, we didn't rent a boat. We chartered, I guess you say chartered, a mini yacht, and we were catered to as we went from island to island, and that's where I got really sunburnt. As you can see, my nose is burnt. So I had a really good time. And so, yeah, Scorpion, thank you so much. Number 2 warrior is Boots Hafner. Boots saying, all right, all right, all right. Our host, James Carner, is back. The voices rumble airwaves and creator of Elite Potion. Hello, fellow warriors, and let's all hit that thumbs up button. Thank you very much. Yeah, do me a favor. If you can with me, hit the thumbs up, just like I'm doing right now while I'm on the show, and hit live chat, and you won't lose your place, I promise. Guys, thank you so much for being here. It's really, I feel refreshed. I'm happy. I don't like doing the show in the motorhome, but our power is out. It's going to be out for hours, literally like another hour, they say. It's already been out for 2 hours, so I had to come in here and do it all, so there's really nothing I can do about that. So there you have it. All right, guys, let's get into, oh, well, let's get into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
Well, I don't know if you guys know this, but Friday, gold crashed. Friday, gold and silver crashed. A $2.7 trillion deficit in, I guess you could say, loss. But guys, this is actually great news for the American economy. Now, I was sitting down talking with Eddie as we were looking at the most beautiful blues of ocean I've ever seen. I've never seen turquoise and dark blues and light blues and all kinds of blues, all in just like one landscape of ocean. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And we're sitting there on the white beach, just drinking fruit drinks, which they got like mango drinks and stuff. And we're just talking about, you know, global events, and he's asking me questions on what I think is going to happen, etc. And I said, Eddie, when we took Venezuela, which I'm not for or against, it wasn't my idea. I didn't do it. But when we took Venezuela, that brought the dollar back from the dead, because it's now going to be backed by the Venezuelan oil, which I'm sure that the Trump administration is going to force them to take all products via the dollar only, just like Saudi Arabia had it. So that's what I'm pretty positive is going to happen. And so when that actually occurs and they hold on to their agreement that we have with them after we kicked their ass like I've never seen before. After that is where we are going to see the economy actually get better. And this is what I believe Trump was talking about, the golden age, which will follow. So I don't know what he means by golden age. I didn't see Venezuela coming, but it is one of out of four, the largest oil reserves on Earth. And I know everyone's like, that's the kind of crude oil that we can't produce. That's bad crude oil. It's rotten crude oil. The only good crude was from Saudi Arabia. Dude, whatever. I don't care. If it was bad oil, why would Russia be caught buying it on the black market and putting it on ships and switching flags all the time, which is the black market? Why would they do that? Well, if it wasn't good. And from what I understand, all the oil refineries in America, they're all set up for this type of crude oil. So it was like, the Orsinis had this planned all along. So when it comes to that, don't worry about it. Nothing bad is going to happen, folks. I do believe that we just secured the next 40 to 50 years. And forgive me for yawning, but, when I was in Turks and Caicos, I wasn't under any EMFs. In fact, they don't even have 5G. Any EMF attacks, which I think is coming from 5G, 6G. And I was never tired on that island. In fact, when I tried to take a nap, and I wanted to bad, I could only sleep maybe an hour. And that's usually not my normal sleep pattern. I have to sleep 2 or 3 hours a day. And that's a nap, okay? Because I'm tired all the time. But when I was there in Turks and Caicos, I wasn't tired at all. I was absolutely 100% awake. In fact, I went to bed early because it felt right. Like, this is the time to go to bed. It's like 8, 9, and the latest 10, which my normal night is 1, 2 in the morning is when I go to bed. So it was actually bizarre. And then I'd wake up at 7 in the morning every single morning. Just like, I try to go back. I can't sleep anymore. And then I go make a cup of coffee. And then I go and I sit down and watch the beautiful landscape that I was staying at this hotel, which was called West Indies Hotel, I believe it was, in Provincialis. That was the island we stayed on in Turks and Caicos. And dude, it was like all marble, beautiful, AC. But then in the morning, it was just perfect. It was like 79 degrees, but 30 to 40% humidity. It was crazy, but it wasn't hot. But there were times where it was hot. But man, did I have such a great time. House Democrats mutiny. Well, Schumer's deal with White House threatening longer time to be shut down. Ooh, I thought we'd been shut down. I thought we'd been shut down since what? Late November? And what, now we're saying we're going to shut down again. Who gives a shit? Judge orders release of 5-year-old detainees by ICE in Minneapolis. Let me tell you what ICE is. Political agenda. Okay? ICE is going to kill people if they get in their way because they have the full authority now because the American people haven't done shit about it. That's on you, not on ICE. You can't just protest your way out of this. Oh, stop killing people. They're going to do it because we've been a police state for a very long time. And the only way to take out a police state is by force. Now, I'm not recommending you go do it by force. There better be a lot of discernment and a lot of wisdom backing it up. Plus, you're going to have a lot of money because, well, to take out the government of the United States of America, which can basically take out an entire country in a night, you're looking at trouble. So good luck with that. They said they weren't close to Epstein. Now there's new documents show otherwise. We're closer than ever. It's only been, what, 10 years now since we've been saying, where are the Epstein files? And now we're closer to finding the issues. Well, the issues is this. It's real simple. All of the elites are in bed with the black male Israel Mossad. And they're blackmailed. And the greatest way to do it is to get them drugged up and take video of them doing stuff with things that I shouldn't talk about, or they'll really come after me. But they do rotten things, hurting precious things. And then they do a videotape and then they show them, they say, okay, you're going to pass whatever law I say, or we're going to release this. Well, have the Mossad released anything on anybody at all? So I say, don't be a pussy if you're one of the political assholes that are in charge of your district. Don't be a pussy, all right? Come forward and say, look, I got to tell you the truth. Here's who's running the show. Here's why they're running the show. And here's what they want to achieve. And they've got blackmail on me, and they're probably going to take me out. At least have the balls to go and do that. If you can't do that, that's on you, not on me. Democrat Christian Menefee wins special election for a vacant house in some deep blue area. Who gives a shit? Federal, because they're all on the same. It's left and there's right, and they are the same bird. They all take their orders from the Bank for International Settlements. Federal judge says she won't halt the immigration enforcement surge. Well, who gives a shit? You know what? Immigration has been happening since America was founded. And if you really look at the big picture, why are we blaming all of, all the murder and robberies on immigrants? Is it really the immigrants, or is it just how people are? I think it's just how people are. But boy, they want to make sure that immigrants are the target. And they're the ones we need. They're the boogeyman now. We need to get rid of the immigrants. No, we need immigrants. It's been a part of the economics of things. Are you going to go out and pick those strawberries? Believe me, I did when I was a kid, and they didn't pay me crap. And I got all the strawberries I could eat, but geez, it wasn't fun. I didn't make much money. Well, there are people out there, immigrants, who are willing to pick the strawberries for a lot less and not even asking for health insurance, days off, sick days, all that other shit. So they're a part of the economy. Get used to it. But to judge them and blame knife deaths and gunshots and all that on immigrants, dude, you're in America. America is the Wild West. Get out your gun and shoot people, because that's what you do in America. So why blame that on immigrants? We did it. We've done it since America started. Started with a musket, and then during the Wild West, they really ramped it up with even cooler guns. But that's just how it is. Israeli airstrikes kill at least 32 Palestinians in Gaza, rescue officials say. Now, we know the percentages of how many people die. Oh, and 32, that's also a Masonic number. So they're definitely spitting out clues here to their fellow Masonic friends. But look, we know the percentage of the people in Gaza who are dying, between the children, women, and the elderly. 70% of that 32 people who died, 70% of them were women, children, and seniors. Not men, just women, children, and seniors. So you could thank Israel for all of that bullshit. Hey, I'm just the messenger here. Don't blame me. All right, guys, when we come back tonight, we're going to be talking about part 15, the examination of Esther, Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox, and the King James examination.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
Paying federal income tax is voluntary. So why has every person you know done it their entire lives? You were told it's the law, but the system was built on a lie hidden in plain sight, that you are required by law to pay. The truth is, 98% of Americans don't owe income tax by law. Federal income tax is for federal employees. For everyone else, it's voluntary. You agreed to pay when you signed your first tax return, and you've been renewing that contract every year since. Sounds too good to be true? You're asking, why doesn't everyone know this? Because almost everyone signed before they were old enough to understand it. It's time to unlearn the lie and break free from IRS jurisdictions, protect your assets, and keep more of what you earn legally. Visit unincorporatedisassociations.com now and become tax-free.
All right, we're back to the show. Live in the van. My power's still out in my neighborhood. A transformer was blown, and it says it takes 2 hours for that kind of stuff to be fixed. So there's really nothing I can do. So we're stuck here in the van. But hey, at least I was able to get my Starlink up and live. And believe me, dude, I was racing with time, man. I was literally rebooting right up until showtime. So we got in at the right time. Since I got back, apparently a lot of people are missing. We're down to 4 people on the live chat, or 4 people on the live chat. Normally we have around 8. So it's either you can't hear me or I don't know, but it is what it is. All right, guys. So Esther is one of the most difficult books in Scripture to hear honestly. And not because Esther is unclear, but because it refuses to explain itself. God is never named. Prayer is implied but not recorded. The law is absent. The temple is irrelevant. Prophets do not appear, and yet the people survive. That alone should make us cautious. Esther is not a book about righteousness rewarded. Esther is a book about preservation permitted. So this examination tonight is going to begin by saying what Esther is not. It is not a model for faithfulness in exile, but it is a celebration of political success. Esther is not a blueprint for how God prefers his people to survive under foreign power. Esther does not show covenant restored. It shows covenant remembered just enough not to be erased. That distinction matters because misreading Esther as triumph distorts everything that came before it. Now, placed after Ezra and Nehemiah, Esther does not advance the story of return. It pauses it. It restores alignment, actually, and Nehemiah guards it, as Esther shows what happens to those who remain scattered, assimilated, and even silent. Now, there is no rebuilding here because nothing is being rebuilt in Esther. There is no rebuilding, and the people are not returning. They are enduring, and endurance is not obedience. It is survival. Now, throughout this book, God does not intervene openly. And again, we're examining the difference between the King James and the Ethiopian canon. So God in Esther doesn't speak. He does not even warn. He does not command. Instead, the narrative moves through coincidence, timing, restraint, and reversal. Boot says, here you had to go back out and come back now, working just fine. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe I should reboot that on the old Rumble, huh? That would be good because, geez, dude, it just sucks having a live show and having problems like this. So this does not mean that God is absent in Esther. It doesn't mean that. It means God is just hidden. And hiddenness is itself a judgment of sorts, not against the people individually, but against a condition where alignment has been traded for safety. Oh, we know what it's like to trade your freedom for safety. But the children of Israel have a whole different thing here going on. Now, this examination will try to resolve Esther's discomfort. It will not soften its violence or justify its politics or sanctify its silence. The Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness and the King James Bible are close throughout this entire book. As I've told you guys before, that right before Job, that's where we can get back to showing the big differences in the textual information between King James, which is the skeleton version of the entire Bible, and the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Christian text is the skin that puts the entire thing together. And that closeness is part of the message. Where scripture is read aloud, it will be because framing or cadence alters how agency, responsibility, or moral weight is actually heard. Where the text is silent, and that silence will be honored. Now, Esther survives without prayer recorded, without repentance declared, and without covenant renewal enacted. As deliverance comes, but transformation does not. The threat is removed, but the condition still remains. So the book, it ends not with return, but with commemoration. Memory replaces obedience. Survival replaces alignment, and yet the people live. And this is the tension here that Esther leaves unresolved. God preserves life without endorsing the way it is lived. He allows deliverance without announcing approval. He protects lineage without restoring order. And Esther does not contradict the story that we have traced from Genesis to Nehemiah. It actually completes a necessary warning within it. When alignment is lost, but memory remains, God may still preserve, but he will do so quietly, without glory, and without declaring the outcome righteous. Esther is not about where God is absent. It is about what survival looks like when God no longer intervenes openly. And it forces the audience to confront an uncomfortable truth. Preservation is not the same as favor, as survival is not the same as obedience. And silence is not the same as peace. So Esther opens in a condition unlike any book examined so far. The people of Israel are alive, numerous, and socially embedded, yet spiritually unlocated. They're not in rebellion, but neither are they in return, as they are not building altars or restoring law or even guarding covenant memory publicly. Remember, they're just coming out of the sins of Solomon and what Solomon did to God by putting other gods into his temple, and God warning them, dude, it's going to take you a long time to come back to covenant. And they exist as a population within empire rather than a people ordered around obedience. Now, this distinction does matter because Esther is not a continuation of restoration. Esther is a parallel survival narrative unfolding alongside it. Now, unlike Ezra and Nehemiah, where the trauma of exile produces repentance and reorientation, Esther presents a community that has adjusted. Names are Persian. Customs are imperial. Safety has been achieved through assimilation rather than obedience. And nothing in the opening chapter suggests that return is being considered or even remembered as a goal. The danger forced or faced in Esther is not spiritual collapse, as that has already occurred quietly. And the danger is actually extermination by a system that tolerates difference only until it becomes inconvenient. Now, in both the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness and the King James Bible, the absence of explicit covenant language is not accidental. There is no prayer recorded, no fasting directed toward God by name, no appeal to the law as authority. And identity persists, but alignment does not govern behavior. The people know who they are ethnically, but they are no longer living as a people structured by obedience. And this is not portrayed as virtue. It's actually portrayed as a condition. This context explains the silence of God in Esther. God does not speak because he is not publicly sought. He does not command because no one is asking for instruction here. And he does not intervene openly because covenant alignment is not being exercised openly. So this is not abandonment. It's restraint. God preserves life without restoring relationship dynamics that require mutual engagement, as divine action mirrors human posture. Now, Esther therefore introduces a very sobering truth that has been developing since exile, as preservation does not require obedience. God can and does preserve lineage even when alignment has weakened. But preservation under these conditions carries a cost. There is no correction, no transformation, and no renewal here, as survival becomes the goal rather than faithfulness. Safety replaces obedience as the organizing principle of life. And this is why the narrative here never asks whether the people should return, repent, or even realign. Those questions have already been bypassed, as the story operates entirely within the logic of endurance. The people are not punished for assimilation. They're endangered by it. Their survival depends on righteousness, but on timing, access, and favor within a foreign system. So reading Esther this way actually prevents a very common misinterpretation here. Esther is not showing faithfulness rewarded through courage alone. It's showing preservation granted without endorsement, as God does not correct the condition in this book. He prevents erasure here, and that difference matters. Lineage is saved, but alignment is not restored. The people live, but they remain where they are. Now, from the very beginning, Esther forces the audience to confront a very difficult question. What does it mean when God saves a people without calling them back? Well, the answer Esther offers is very unsettling. It means survival can occur without return, and that survival, while merciful, is incomplete. Now, here we're going to show two differences. This is Esther 1:12 through 15, where it talks about power displayed without accountability. Here's the difference between the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox text and the King James. Here's the Ethiopian, I quote. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, which was sent by the hand of the messengers. Then the king was exceedingly angry, and his wrath burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for thus the king's matter was conducted before all who knew law and judgment, according to law, which shall be done to Queen Vashti, because she did not obey the command of the king Ahasuerus, delivered by the messengers. Question mark. Well, here's the King James Version. But the Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wrath, and his anger burned in him. Pretty close. Then the king said to the wise men which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment, what shall we do unto the Queen Vashti according to law, because she hath not performed the commandments of the king Ahasuerus by the chamberlains? Pretty darn close. And the refusal here itself is very simple. A command is issued. A person declines. And what follows reveals everything. The response is immediate, emotional, and unexamined. Then wrath ignites before reason enters the room. Law is not summoned to restrain power. It is summoned to preserve it. So the difference in the Ethiopian canon and the King James is that power was summoned to preserve it, not to be restrained. And this is what changes the tone of the book. Now, the Ethiopian phrases and phrasing here, it keeps the order exposed. Anger comes first. Counsel comes second. Judgment does not interrupt emotion, it just legalizes it. And the wise men are not asked whether the king is right. They are asked how to make the refusal impossible to repeat. So the King James record preserves the same exchange, yet English rhythm can make the process feel customary, almost administrative. So the Ethiopian witness refuses that comfort here. This is not order functioning very well. This is order reacting defensively. So no charge is investigated, no motive is examined, no appeal is even offered. Vashti is not accused of treason, immorality, or harm. She has embarrassed power, and that alone is sufficient. As the law is activated not to seek truth, but to secure authority against vulnerability. This is not a court. It's a mechanism here. And wisdom here does not mean discernment either. It means familiarity with precedent, as the men who knew the times are not moral arbiters. They are technicians of control, and they know how power behaves when threatened, and they know how to protect it. Now, the danger of this system is not that it is lawless. It is that it is lawful without justice. Everything that happens is done according to law, and that is precisely the problem, as law has become a shield for pride and not boundary for behavior. Now, Vashti's removal is very swift, very clean, and irreversible. She disappears from the record without defense and without restoration. Now, the text does not tell the audience how to feel about this. It just simply allows the silence to stand here. And that silence is not neutrality either. It's exposure. This moment should teach us what kind of world this is before Esther ever appears. Law is present, yet subordinate to emotion. Power does not ask whether it's right or wrong. It asks how to avoid humiliation. This is the environment into which Esther will be drawn here, folks. Not a righteous kingdom waiting to reform. Not a broken people crying out for deliverance. But a polished system that knows how to eliminate inconvenience efficiently and without guilt. And in such a world, survival is not guaranteed by innocence. Safety is not secured by obedience. One misstep here, one refusal, one moment of visibility is enough to be erased. We're talking about the book of Esther and the examination between the King James Version and the Tewahedo Ethiopian canon. So the text does not call this evil. It does something far more unsettling. It shows it functioning normally. In Esther 3:8 through 11, we find in the Ethiopian Tewahedo, it says, and I quote, "Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. It is not fitting for the king to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let it be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasures. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. That's the Ethiopian version. Here's the King James. Listen carefully. And Haman said to the king Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom. And their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore, it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it pleases the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasures. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. Now, Haman does not begin with hatred here. He begins with classification. A people are identified not by name, but by pattern. They're scattered. They are different. They do not fully assimilate. So the charge is not rebellion. It is nonconformity. The Ethiopian phrasing here preserves the cold precision of the accusation, folks. Toleration is framed as weakness. Difference is treated as disorder. The problem is not what the people have done, but what they are permitted to continue being. You're going to be children of God? Are you going to be in the covenant with him? And as we've learned throughout all of this, they just don't care. So law is not being broken loudly, but it is being resisted quietly. So what follows is the most dangerous move in the book of Esther. Destruction is proposed not as vengeance, but as efficiency. The phrase, it is not fitting for the king to tolerate them. Well, this shifts the discussion from morality to administration. Elimination is then framed as maintenance, as genocide then becomes just policy. So the King James record contains the same proposal, yet English cadence can make it sound like a personal grievance elevated too far. So the Ethiopian witness makes it very clear this is structural logic. Haman does not appeal to rage here. He appeals to order. He does not accuse the Jews of plotting overthrow. He accuses them of not fully belonging. And this is why the king asks no questions, and no investigation is actually required. No evidence is being demanded either. The argument fits the system already revealed in part 2. Just above, as we're in part 3 right now. So authority is protected by law. Law is then mobilized by convenience. And the signet ring is handed over without deliberation because the logic aligns with existing power instincts. And the money here matters, but not because the kingdom needed it. The payment functions as insulation. Violence is outsourced. Responsibility is diluted. And the king does not kill. The decree does. So Haman does not strike. The system does. Silver moves, guilt then disappears into procedure. How convenient. So here the Ethiopian framing is especially severe. Haman is named the enemy of the Jews, but not because of his proposal, but because of what the proposal reveals. He understands the system well enough to weaponize its values, and he knows that difference can be criminalized without accusation, and that silence can be legislated into death. So the casting of lots that follows does not soften the act here. It sanctifies it administratively. Timing is then ritualized. Chance is invoked. So the decision is no longer personal anymore. It's just scheduled. This is how mass violence hides from conscience. It becomes inevitable rather than chosen. Just like ICE killing people nowadays, it's just procedure. That's not covenant or law with God. It becomes inevitable rather than chosen. And this is how mass violence hides from conscience. This moment is the ethical center of the book. No miracle intervenes. No voice speaks from heaven. God is not named. The machinery runs smoothly. That is the point. As evil here does not look chaotic. It looks organized. So you're not meant to ask whether Haman is wicked here. That's obvious. But the question is, why his argument works so easily? Well, if it permits the king to kill people, let's do it. So be it. The answer has already been given. Power without accountability seeks silence, not justice. This is something we should be learning in America today. The book of Esther teaches us the kinds of kings that rule over us and why they make the decisions they do, because they have no conscience. They're not seeking law. They're not seeking justice. They seek silence. And law without righteousness seeks uniformity, not truth. Screw that, huh? So Esther has not spoken yet, and Mordecai has not acted yet. The threat is already complete on paper, but what follows will not undo a sudden mistake. It will confront a system that believes it has done nothing wrong. What do we do? I didn't do it. So here the book makes its claims without preaching it. Genocide does not require madness. It requires paperwork. That's awful. You would never, ever be taught this in a regular church. What I'm witnessing to tonight is very profound. It also requires leadership who prefer quiet to conscience, like Trump. Quiet to conscience. And it requires law that answers fear instead of restraining it. Well, it sounds like they're living in a police state. And once the ring changes hands, the outcome is legally unstoppable, unless someone is willing to risk visibility in a world that erases it. So after the decree is actually issued, the most striking feature of the narrative is not an action, but restraint. Esther does not speak. Mordecai does not immediately petition the king. The Jewish people do not organize resistance, and the silence is not confusion. It's simple calculation, and it reveals the ethical cost of survival within empire. And in both the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness and the King James Record, Esther's identity is deliberately concealed. Her Jewishness is not hidden out of fear alone, but because visibility itself is dangerous. To be known is to be vulnerable. To remain silent is to remain alive. And the Ethiopian framing here preserves this as a structural reality rather than a personal flaw. Esther's silence is not presented as cowardice either. It's presented as adaptation. Well, it's what we do. So this really matters because Esther's position is not prophetic. She's not sent to comfort the king or confront the king. She's placed within proximity to power without authority to challenge it. So her silence is the cost of access, as the palace offers protection only as long as identity is muted. And this is the bargain of empire. You may belong if you do not remind us who you are. So the King James cadence can sometimes make Esther's silence feel temporary or tactical, as though she is simply waiting for the right moment. But the Ethiopian witness holds the tension longer, as silence is not merely delay. It is the conditioning of survival itself. Esther is safe because she is unknown, and the moment she is known, protection then dissolves. And Mordecai's posture reinforces this reality. He mourns publicly, but he does not enter the king's gate in sackcloth. Grief is allowed only to a boundary. And there are places where truth may be expressed and places where it cannot. The system tolerates sorrow at a distance, but it will not permit disruption near power. And this exposes a core theme of Esther. In exile within empire, survival often requires fragmentation of self, as identity is split between public compliance and private memory. The faith is not denied, but it is declared. God is not rejected, but he is not invoked. Life then continues, but alignment is compromised. And the danger here is subtle. Silence preserves life, but it also normalizes injustice. The decree stands. The machinery still moves forward. No one challenges its legitimacy. Survival then becomes passive participation. And this is not because the people agree with what is happening, but because the system has made dissent functionally impossible. And Esther's silence, therefore, cannot be romanticized. It is simply understandable. It's necessary, but it's also costly. As the longer silence holds, the more irreversible the outcome then becomes. Time itself begins to work against the people. What was once a threat becomes scheduled reality. And this is where the book tightens its moral tension. God remains unnamed, prayer is not recorded, intervention does not arrive. The narrative forces the audience to sit inside the consequences of prolonged accommodation here. And survival has bought time, but it's not bought any safety whatsoever. So silence can protect a person, but it cannot protect a people indefinitely, especially those who are not following the covenant of God. And there comes a point when concealment no longer preserves life, but delays death. Esther has not yet reached that point, but the clock has begun to run. And what follows will test whether survival without witness can ever become deliverance without return. So the turning point in Esther does not begin with spectacle here, folks. It begins with inevitability, as Mordecai's message to Esther cuts through illusion. Concealment will not protect her any longer, and the decree has gone out under royal authority. Once it is sealed, it cannot be revoked. And the empire does not distinguish between private and public identity here. When extermination is legalized, anonymity becomes temporary at best. So in both the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness and the King James Record, Mordecai's warning is precise and unsentimental. Think not that thou shalt escape in the king's house. Well, that's not an accusation, that's clarity. As Esther's safety has always been conditional. Her invisibility has been tolerated but not affirmed. And the system that elevated her can eliminate her without any contradiction. So the same mechanism that crowned her can erase her as well. Now, the Ethiopian framing here preserves the weight of this exchange without turning it into heroic rhetoric. Mordecai does not flatter Esther with destiny language here. He does not declare that she was chosen in advance for his exact hour. He presents possibility rather than prophecy. Who, it says, and I quote, "Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Unquote. Well, the phrase, it refuses certainty, and it places responsibility where certainty would have offered comfort. So Esther must act without knowing the outcome here. And this uncertainty is crucial. As in earlier books, divine speech clarified direction, and prophets announced consequence. Law was read aloud. And here, no voice speaks from heaven. No angel intervenes. No vision appears. The silence that has characterized the book continues. God remains unnamed even as the crisis sharpens. And the Ethiopian witness does not attempt to soften this absence. It's allowed the narrative to stand in tension. Esther's response is not immediate action, but communal fasting. She does not gather weapons, she gathers restraint. She calls the people to abstain from food and drink for 3 days. So the text records this fasting plainly without any embellishment. So in the Hebrew tradition reflected in the King James Record, prayer is not explicitly mentioned here. And the Ethiopian witness likewise preserves the austerity of the scene itself. The people fast, but the narrative does not dramatize their appeal. So this omission intensifies the moment rather than weakening it. Fasting without recording prayer forces the audience, or you guys, to confront something uncomfortable. That the people turn toward humility, but the text refuses to assure them of divine response. So their action is not transactional here between the kingdom of heaven. They do not fast because they have been promised rescue. They fast because there is nothing else left to do. So Esther's statement, if I perish, is often quoted as inspirational. But in context, it is sober acceptance of consequence. So there is no triumph in her voice. She is not declaring invincibility. She is acknowledging mortality. And approaching the king uninvited is legally punishable by death. So the golden scepter here, if extended, will signal favor. And if not, the law will execute her without any appeal. So the Ethiopian framing, it preserves the gravity of this risk. Esther does not assume that her position will shield her. She does not assume that the king's affection will override protocol. She prepares for the possibility that obedience to responsibility may cost her life. So courage here is not optimism, it's willingness. Willingness to come forward and do the right thing. So this marks a shift in the narrative, and until now, survival has depended on concealment. Esther remained silent. Mordecai remained outside the palace gate. Identity remained guarded. And within this decision, concealment now ends. Esther moves from hidden alignment to visible risk. And once she steps forward, retreat is impossible. So the empire will know who she is. Now, theologically, this moment is restrained rather than dramatic. There's no covenant ceremony, no invocation of promise, no appeal to ancestral deliverance. Esther does not reference Abraham, Moses, or even David. She does not even cite the law. So the silence is intentional. Deliverance, if it comes, will not be announced in advance. It will unfold without commentary. So this makes Esther distinct from Ezra and Nehemiah, as these books operate within public alignment, as we've talked about in the other shows. The law is read aloud. Covenant is renewed openly. While in Esther, faith operates beneath the surface. The people fast quietly. The queen approaches cautiously. Providence, if present, remains unspoken. So the risk that Esther takes is not only physical, it's relational. If the king refuses her exposure will confirm her identity to the entire court. And this concealment that preserved her will collapse instantly. She will no longer be the compliant queen of empire. She will be the visible representation of a condemned people. Survival has reached its limit. Silence has exhausted its usefulness. The decree has made neutrality impossible, as Esther's courage is not heroic in the conventional sense. It's necessary. She steps forward not because victory is certain, but because inaction now guarantees destruction. Now, this is a quieter form of faith than what has been seen in previous books, as there are no promises spoken, no assurances offered, only fasting, resolve, and risk. So Esther does not claim that God will save her. She acts because it is time to act. And what follows will not look like an open miracle. It will look like timing, favor, delay, and reversal within the structures of empire. But none of that can begin until someone is willing to step out of concealment and into visibility. So here, courage does not shout. Courage prepares. And when it moves, it does so knowingly. That obedience does not eliminate danger. It only clarifies responsibility. So Esther's approach to the king does not produce immediate confrontation. She does not expose Haman at once. She does not announce the decree publicly. Instead, she invites the king and Haman to a banquet. Then she delays. Then she invites them again. And what appears at first as hesitation is in fact controlled timing. The reversal in Esther does not unfold through open miracle either. It actually unfolds through patience inside the system. So in both the Ethiopian and King James, the structure of these scenes are deliberate. Esther gains access. The king extends the golden scepter. She is asked to speak, and she defers. So the delay is not fear, it's discernment of spirit. And exposure must occur at the right moment, not merely at the earliest opportunity. So the Ethiopian framing preserves the steadiness of this pacing. And there is no dramatic confrontation in the throne room at all. There was no prophetic denunciation, as Esther does not accuse in anger. She invites again. The system that legalized death is not overturned through outrage, it's redirected through sequence. So what intervenes during this delay is very crucial. The king cannot sleep. Well, the chronicles of the kingdom are read. Mordecai's earlier act of loyalty is discovered, and honor that has been overlooked is suddenly remembered. In a book where God is never named, Esther, this is the closest the narrative comes to unveiling providence. Yet even here, no divine commentary appears. The sleepless night is not called a miracle, it is simply recorded. So the King James cadence can sometimes allow this moment to feel ironic or even poetic. The Ethiopian witness preserves it as structural precision. The empire contains within itself the record that will unravel its own injustice. And what had been forgotten actually becomes decisive. Memory, not force, begins the reversal. So Haman's humiliation unfolds not through accusation, but through a miscalculation. Asked how a man should be honored, he assumes the honor is for himself, as his pride speaks before caution can restrain it. So the result is exposure without direct confrontation. He becomes the agent of Mordecai's public elevation, and the empire reverses its posture toward the man it intended to destroy. So this pattern matters. Reversal in Esther does not bypass law. It moves within it. The king's favor does not erase the decree. It creates counteraction. So the system is not shattered, it's being redirected. And what had been written cannot be undone, but what is written next will alter its effect. So the Ethiopian framing, it actually holds this tension very carefully, as deliverance is not complete yet. The decree still stands, and the people are still marked for destruction. And the gallows prepared for Mordecai remain visible. But the shift here is real. But it is actually partial, as timing has turned, but danger has not yet disappeared. Now, when Esther finally reveals her identity and names Haman's plot, the confrontation is contained. She does not accuse the king. She frames the threat as shared loss. She says, "We have been sold." Well, the language does not inflame the throne. It exposes the cost of the decree. And the king's anger turns toward Haman, not toward the system that allowed him to act. Haman's execution is very swift. The same gallows he built became the instruments of his own death. Yet even this does not undo the written law. The structure remains intact. A new decree must be issued. Protection must be legalized. So deliverance in Esther, it actually operates through reversal of position rather than annihilation of empire. Haman fails, but Persia stands. And the law shifts, but the throne does not collapse. And Providence works through insomnia, pride, timing, and exposure, not thunder, not fire, not visible intervention, as the angry God we read from the King James. And this is consistent within the book's silence. God is not invoked because he is not operating in spectacle. He's operating in sequence. And the reversal is undeniable, but it's also not theatrical. It's just procedural. Now here, survival begins to move toward preservation, but it does so without restoring alignment. The people are saved from destruction, yet they remain within empire. So the danger is neutralized, but the condition has not changed yet, as Esther has shifted the outcome, not the environment. So the tension remains. Reversal is not redemption. It's rescue within exile. And the book here, Esther, it's careful never to confuse the two. So the fall of Haman is not the climax of Esther. It's just the pivot point. The decree authorizing the destruction of the Jews remains legally intact. So this detail, it's not incidental. It reveals the nature of empire itself. A king may remove a favored official, but he does not admit error. So law once sealed does not dissolve. It must be countered by new law. So in both the Ethiopian and the King James, Esther and Mordecai are given permission to write in the king's name. So the language is very precise. They may issue a decree allowing the Jews to gather to defend their lives and to strike those who would attack them. This is not a repeal. It's empowerment within constraint. So the Ethiopian framing preserves the weight of the phrase to stand for their lives. Standing here is not passive, though. It implies confrontation. The Jews are not hidden away for protection. They're authorized to act. So the empire that once enabled their destruction now enables their resistance. Yet this reversal does not abolish violence, it redistributes it. So the King James cadence here carries the same authorization, yet familiarity with the phrasing can sometimes dull its severity. The decree includes permission to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish. But those who rise against them, the language is mirrored here. The threat that was directed toward the Jews is now legally reversible toward their enemies. So the symmetry, it's deliberate. This creates unavoidable moral tension, as deliverance in Esther is not achieved through supernatural suspension of conflict. It unfolds through legalized force, and the Jews defend themselves, and their enemies then fall. So the text records numbers, cities, and outcomes, but it does not hide the bloodshed, and it does not reduce it to a metaphor. So the Ethiopian witness, it holds this very plainly. It does not insert theological commentary to justify or condemn. It just simply records. The people gather, they prevail. In Susa, the capital, a second day is granted for defense. Haman's sons are hanged publicly. So the narrative does not linger sentimentally, but neither does it avert its gaze. So this moment must not be romanticized. The Jews are not portrayed as conquering heroes reclaiming destiny. They are a minority population surviving a scheduled extermination. And their action here is reactive, not expansionist. Yet, survival still involves force. Preservation here is not bloodless. So the empire remains intact, and the king remains enthroned. And the legal system that permitted genocide remains the system that now permits defense. So the environment is not transformed. The people have not been called back to covenant renewal. They've not been summoned to repentance or instructed to return to Jerusalem. They've just been simply allowed to live. And this distinction here, I think, is crucial, as Esther does not present deliverance as spiritual awakening. It presents it as reversal of immediate threat. As Mordecai is elevated, he becomes second to the king, and the Jews gain honor in the provinces. So fear falls upon those who had opposed them as influence increases, but alignment is not addressed. So the celebration of Purim emerges from this reversal. The days of sorrow become the days of festering. The days of sorrow became days of feasting and gift giving, not festering. The Ethiopian framing preserves this as institutional memory. And the casting of lots that once determined their destruction now becomes the name of their deliverance, as memory is established so that reversal will not be forgotten. Yet the celebration centers on survival, not return. The temple is absent, the land of Israel is not mentioned, and covenant law is not renewed. And there is no public reading of the Torah, no recommitment ceremony, no prophetic interpretation of events. The silence that had characterized the book remains intact even in victory. So this is where Esther diverges sharply from Ezra and Nehemiah, as in those books, restoration is oriented toward alignment with God. But in Esther, deliverance is oriented toward preservation, as the Jews are protected, but they remain within empire, and they celebrate under Persian authority. Their safety depends on favor and decree, not covenant renewal. So the Ethiopian witness does not exaggerate this outcome here. It does not claim that Persia has become righteous or that God had publicly vindicated his people. It simply records that annihilation had been avoided. Survival is secured. Influence is granted. Memory is institutionalized, all because of Esther's discernment. But redemption is not completed yet. The book closes with Mordecai's greatness and the prosperity of the Jews under imperial structure. So this ending is intentionally restrained here. There is no call to leave Persia, no divine commandment to rebuild worship, no summons to return to Jerusalem. The people are safe where they are. So God has preserved his people from extinction here, folks. And he has reversed the decree of death. He has exposed pride and elevated faithfulness, yet he has not drawn them out of empire. He has not reestablished them in covenant centrality. Deliverance has occurred, yes. The lineage continues, yes. Memory is then secured. But the exile condition, in its broader sense, has not been undone. As Esther ends not with a homecoming, but with survival stabilized within foreign power, the people live, they rejoice, and then they remember, and they remain. All because of one woman who had discernment. So the final structural movement in Esther is not the defeat of enemies, but the establishment of memory. The Feast of Purim is instituted so that the reversal will not be forgotten. This is significant as the book closes not with temple worship, prophetic interpretation, or national repentance, but with festival and documentation. So in both the Ethiopian and the King James, the days are formally named. Letters are then sent throughout the provinces. And the Jews bind themselves and their descendants to keep these days annually. So mourning has turned to feasting, fear has turned to celebration, and memory is fixed into the calendar. So the Ethiopian framing here preserves the administrative clarity of this act, as the institution of Purim is not spontaneous joy alone. It's written, circulated, and confirmed. And what was once sealed for death is now sealed for remembrance. As the same imperial mechanisms that carried the decree of destruction now carry the decree of celebration. This matters because survival of the Jews is secured not only through force, but through documentation. Memory becomes protection. Forgetting would invite repetition. The feast ensures that reversal is retold. Yet something is absent here. Unlike Passover, Purim is not explicitly tied to covenantal instruction from God. So there's no divine commandment recorded initiating it. The people respond to historical reversal by formalizing remembrance themselves. So the feast is communal and binding, but it is not presented as a new covenant ceremony. So the King James cadence here preserves the same feature, as the emphasis falls on joy, feasting, sending portions from one another, and gifts to the poor. So the structure of the celebration reinforces solidarity and gratitude, but it does not restore temple worship or reestablish sacrificial order. It commemorates deliverance within exile, but not return from it. So the Ethiopian witness does not attempt to fill this silence with theological commentary. It allows the festival to stand as historical response rather than prophetic renewal. So this is important, as Purim celebrates preservation, not transformation. So the narrative then closes with a brief summary of Ahasuerus' power and Mordecai's prominence. As Mordecai is described as a great man among the Jews, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all of his seed. The empire continues, its tax system continues, its throne remains unchallenged, and the Jews prosper within it. But the ending here is deliberately restrained on purpose for us to learn a lesson here. There is no departure scene. There is no journey back to Jerusalem. There is no call to rebuild worship, as Esther ends with influence, not exodus. So it basically exposes the final tension of the book. Memory has been institutionalized, but alignment has not publicly been renewed yet. So the people remember what almost happened. They remember how reversal occurred, but the text does not show them returning to covenant centrality. As Purim safeguards history, but it does not complete redemption. So this distinction is critical for understanding Esther's theological place. The book demonstrates that God preserves his people even when they are integrated within empire. He reverses decrees. He protects lineage. He frustrates pride. But preservation does not equal restoration. So the Ethiopian framing keeps this boundary very intact. It refuses to elevate political survival into spiritual triumph. It allows the feast to be what it is, gratitude for life spared. So the book closes where it has consistently operated, inside empire, under foreign authority, sustained by hidden providence. The Jews are alive, they are honored, and they remember, and they remain in Persia. So Esther ends without temple, without prophet, and without explicit mention to God. So this is not an oversight, it's by design, as the silence that began in the opening chapters remain intact to the end. As deliverance has occurred, yet divine speech never breaks the surface here. The absence forces you guys to confront a different mode of providence, one that operates beneath visibility rather than through open declaration. In both the Ethiopian Tewahedo Orthodox Witness and the King James Record, the structural reversals are unmistakable. A sleepless king, a forgotten record remembered, a gallows repurposed, a decree countered. The narrative is filled with timing so precise it resists randomness. Yet no verse attributes these movements to God directly, as providence is implied, but it's not proclaimed. So the Ethiopian framing preserves this restraint with particular steadiness. It does not insert divine explanation where the Hebrew tradition is silent. It allows the events themselves to testify indirectly. The same pattern is evident as well, but the name remains unspoken, as this preserves the integrity of the book's theological tension. God is active, but he is not publicly invoked. So this silence here contrasts sharply with Ezra and Nehemiah itself. There, the law is read aloud, covenant is renewed, God's hand is acknowledged openly, but in Esther, survival unfolds without liturgical center. And the Jews fast, but no prayer is recorded in the Hebrew text. So they celebrate, but no sacrifice is described. The providence here is real, but it remains concealed within the flow of empire. So Esther stands apart from all the books that surround it. Yet it does not contradict them at all. From Genesis through Nehemiah, a consistent pattern has emerged. Warning precedes consequences. Delay reveals mercy. Covenant memory guards identity, and restoration actually requires alignment with God. Esther does not overturn this pattern. It exposes a different phase within it. In Esther, there is no prophetic voice announcing God's will, no covenant ceremony renewing obedience, no temple rebuilt, no return from exile, but instead there is a hidden providence operating inside imperial structure. A decree of annihilation becomes a decree of defense. A gallows prepared for the righteous becomes the instrument of the wicked. A sleepless night shifts history here, and the people survive. It doesn't mention that God made the king sleepless. And the Ethiopian Tewahedo, its witness preserves the book's restraint without inserting what the text does not say at all. That God's name is absent, yet his faithfulness is implied through precision of reversal. So the King James Record carries the same structure here. Neither tradition transforms Esther into overt theological proclamation, but the silence remains intact. And that silence is the book's essential theological statement. God may preserve his covenant people even when they are not operating at covenant center. And he may act without spectacle, without invocation, and without liturgical acknowledgement. And how he did it was through the structural alignment of Esther and him, through discernment. And Providence may move beneath political processes rather than above them, but Esther shows that divine faithfulness does not depend on public visibility. Yet the book also leaves something unfinished. There is no return to Jerusalem here. There's no restoration of temple worship, no public alignment. The people still remain in Persia. They are influential, honored, and secure, but still dispersed. Deliverance has occurred, but redemption has not yet been completed. Esther therefore teaches two truths at once. First, annihilation cannot erase the covenant line. God will not allow his promise to Abraham be extinguished, period. Even if they give you the mRNA shot. Even in exile, even in assimilation, even under empire, preservation remains active. Second, survival inside empire is not the same as dwelling in covenant fullness. Protection is not restoration either. Political reversal is not spiritual renewal. The deeper work of alignment lies beyond this narrative. So from Genesis to Esther, the arc has not changed. God remains steady. Humanity moves through phases: innocence, law, kingship, exile, return, accommodation, etc. But Esther captures a moment where preservation is granted without public repentance, where memory is institutionalized without covenant ceremony, where safety is secured without homecoming. So the book closes not with despair and not with triumph. It closes with survival stabilized and identity remembered. And God acted, even though you couldn't see it. But if we didn't have the full picture of the Ethiopian canon as to what actually restored was the knowledge that Esther had of the previous law, the previous laws, they wouldn't have had this triumph. They would have perished. They would have died. God has acted, the people live, and the exile condition, although softened, it still lingers. As Esther does not end the story, it actually preserves it. This has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Tune in tomorrow night when we do another deep dive into the difference between the Ethiopian canon and the King James. God bless you, thank you, and we will see you guys mañana.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.